Here I am, just 100 metres away from my goal, and all I can think about is turning back. See, the thing is, as soon as you get above 3,000 metres, altitude sickness starts to kick in. People start to get headaches. They start to feel a bit nauseous. They start to go a little bit crazy. And there I was, standing just below 6,088 metres, looking at the peak of Huayna Potosi, which is in Bolivia. It had been my goal to get there for the last 5 days. And during this stage, or during this time, I'd passed over many passes that were 5,200 metres tall. To give you some idea, that's around about the equivalent of Everest Base Camp. And at this point in time, I'm standing 700 metres above that, looking at where I was going to go. But all I could think about was turning back. My head was pounding. I was starting to feel sick myself. But the thing that made me decide what to do next was the 5 days that led up to this very moment. I found myself thinking about those 5 days and what I'd been through. You see, during that time, as I said, I'd gone up 5,200 metres. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And during the nights, it would get down to negative 10 degrees. I'd try to get to sleep, but I'd be in my sleeping bag and just shivering, and I barely slept at all. On what you would think were the good nights, we got to stay in a hut. And during these nights, we'd sleep on the floor. About 6:30, the lights would go off. And you'd get into your sleeping bag. And as soon as you closed your eyes, you heard the rats scampering around the ground, the very ground that you were sleeping on as well. So I didn't sleep much then either. And then each morning I'd wake up a little bit grumpy. And the thing that made that so amazing was I actually had a guide who was really, really friendly. And this guide would wake up and he'd be there with a hot drink, ready for me the next morning to keep me going. He'd offer words of encouragement. And there was even a moment where he took me ice climbing. And that was one of the things that I've always wanted to do. For those of you who don't know what ice climbing is, it's like rock climbing, but instead you've got picks and you're climbing up a glacier or up a frozen waterfall. I didn't know why we did this. I thought it was just for the novelty factor. But the reason we did this was because the last 100 metres of this walk was a ridge. And this ridge was 40 centimetres wide. And on one side of the ridge, on my left-hand side, there was a 400-metre drop. On the other side, there was a little ledge, probably about a metre tall, and then a 2-kilometre drop straight down. And I had my decision to make. Do I want to walk across this ridge, or do I want to turn back? The other thing that made it so special was I'd just met this guy in the Amazon jungle. His name was Andrew. And Andrew, let's call him a bit dopey. Because when I met him in the Amazon jungle, he decided that it would be a good idea for him and another friend just to go deep into the jungle with one guide and nothing to survive but the shirts on their back. They had to find animals and live off that. And when I met him, he had mosquito bites all up his body because he hadn't taken anything to protect himself from that. Over 200 on just his arm. The thing about him as well was, as dopey as he was equally clumsy. And I was unfortunate enough during the last day that we started off at midnight and we were walking up to the peak, I saw him stumble over and over again. Now my guide, it was at this point, just 100 metres away from the end, my guide said, "Tom, I'm now going to attach you and Andrew together," after I'd seen him stumble the whole way. Now Andrew was a big guy. He was probably an extra 20 kilos on top of me, and I knew that if he fell down, I was going with him. But he was a friend. And here I found myself asking, do I go on or do I stop? Do I turn back? And I knew that if I turned back, it meant that Andrew couldn't get there as well because the guide we had to be together. So my decision would impact on him. I found myself asking, do I go on or do I turn back? I knew that if I turned back, it would have made the last 5 days somewhat of a waste because that's what I've been working towards. And as my guide was tying us together, I asked again, do I go on or do I turn back? And before I had a choice, I got pushed forward. My guide had already tied us together and there was a line forming behind us. I had to go on. So I took my first step. Took another step. I took one more step. And I slipped. I held on to the ledge. I crapped myself. I didn't know if I was going to survive. But then I heard my guide and Andrew say, "Come on, Tom, you can do it." So I pulled myself together and I made it across that ridge. I got to the end. And the end was probably, the summit was about half the size of this space here. There was about 10 people at the top. And I was nervous. But at the top was the best view that I've ever seen. For hundreds of kilometres in this direction, I could see mountains with ice just capped all over them. For hundreds of kilometres in this direction, I could see the Amazon jungle. And I could see the shadow that the mountain had cast that I slept underneath the morning before that kept me cold for so long. And it made me think, damn, I just want to get off this mountain. I had a headache, I was pounding. But then when I got off the mountain, I then reflected on it, and I still do to this day. It was the worst moment at that time. I hated every bit of it. But now, it's the best moment from my trip. And what made it so special? It was the struggle. It was the 5 days of hard work that I put in to get into that. It was the support that I had from my guide that helped me through it. And it was that social element, because when you travel alone, you don't necessarily make great connections all the time. But I had a friend there that I was able to share that moment with. Thank you.